Eric Davis, welcome back to Dad Edge, brother.
Hey, so good to be back, man. It's been a while, like we were talking about. I love it.
I honestly can't. It's been so long that I remember the first time we talked because when did your book Raising Men come out? Because that's when we did the podcast a while back.
Oh man, I was just looking at that. I want to say 2019 because I'm out in New York right now, and I was just looking at some. That wasn't the last time I was in New York, but I think it was no. I'm sorry. What is it? 2021 right now, right? No, so we would have been like 2015 or 16.
I was going to say, because I mean, we're talking about, I remember when you and Larry Yatch came on, we were talking about SEAL mindset leaders and that kind of thing. And I could have sworn it was in the first year that we were podcasting, because I remember you were one of the first few Navy SEALs that we had on the podcast. And so I distinctly remember, because at the time I had 4 boys. I just had my 4th son. I was like, oh, raising men, like, it's right up my alley. So yeah, it was a while ago.
Yeah, no, it was a chunk. That's the thing, man. I got the writer's brain. So 4 or 5 years, 4 months, whatever, it all feels the same to me. It's like this blur of writing. Yeah.
I know. Well, so for the men, let's talk to the men really quickly before we get into our topic today, which is avoiding self-sabotage, implementing tactics to ensure that we're performing at a high level, and then sustainability, because I know that's the biggest thing we're talking about. But bring the men up to speed on Raising Men, and that was your first book. I checked this morning as we're recording; it's still a bestseller in one of the categories, and I was like, wow, this book is still going strong. But share 1 or 2 insights from that book for the guys out there who are raising young men. Maybe some of the most important key takeaways from the book.
You know, if I'm going to point to 1 or 2 things, or I would always point to one thing, right? This idea that we need to live life by example. And I don't mean that like a quote or a cliche. I mean, no kidding, our kids are going to model our behavior, right? I think the quote or the thing goes, caught, not taught, right? But there's not usually meaning behind that. What does that mean? What it means is that as men, we need to live a good life. We need to identify that which impacts our ability to live a good life. We need to calculate the capacity required to do so now and when the time comes when we can no longer work, because we can't just work till we die. That's a myth, right? And we have to enjoy it. We have to, identify our purpose, identify our passion, live life on fire. And if I'm going to point to anything in the book, it's really about, that book was as much about raising myself, right? Or the gaps I had from childhood, from my dad getting sick. And the other piece to that too, which would be living life by example, would be live authentically. So one of the, when some idiot male does something and I get the opportunity to go on the news and speak to it, they're like, Eric, what's the problem with masculinity? And they say toxic masculinity. And I will point to that. There's no such thing. That's something we're just making up. But the problem is there's just really one definition of masculinity floating around out there, culturally speaking, and it's ultra aggressive, it's antiquated, and it's just not how things are anymore. Yeah, back in the day, we were bred to fight and hunt, and that's about all we were doing. But now, like even in special forces, CIA, different places like that, it's more like a renaissance. And so we have different types of men now. And if you don't identify what kind of man you are and who you are at your core, you're going to be living an inauthentic life. And that's one of the things we spread to our kids, like a disease. And the topic we'll be covering, we're going to be hitting on some of that stuff. So that to me was that book is all about that. It's all about identifying those gaps.
I love that, man. Especially, in this day and age where, yeah, you're right. Masculine. I don't really, to be honest, I don't get into that conversation. Like I see it a lot on social media and I'm like, yep, there it is again. And, one thing I can tell you is that, raising your kids to be good humans, right? Raising your kids authentically, right? Yeah. Big thing too, that I got from your book. And I remember reading it. It was a while ago, is teaching these kids mindset lessons that are going to serve them in a big way. Right down the road versus, which is what we're talking about today, which is helping men overcome self-doubt, self-sabotage, performing at a high level, and then being able to sustain that. And here's the thing too, right? Here's the cool thing about you and I talking today and talking about this very topic. If we can give men well, if you can give men some strategies around that very topic, right? Also, if we can intertwine them into, hey, not only should you be implementing these things in your life, but here's how you could also teach it to your kids along the way. So not only can you be the example, but you can also articulate some of these strategies performing at a high level. That way, you know, we are the example, but we're also giving these kids, we're equipping them with skills that they can go out and do it themselves, and the pattern doesn't repeat.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not only can they follow our behavior, but like we can kind of hack it for them. You know what I mean? When you hear about people successful, like, oh, it took me 10 years. And in 2008, where I left the teams in Sniper Cell and I went into the world of finance, that was my job. You know, these guys, oh, it took me 10 years to get here. It's like, well, we don't have 10 years. We have about 10 months. So it's not truly a hack, but it's just an optimized way to approach performance. So not only can we figure it out ourselves, like the point men that fathers are meant to be, but then we say, hey, here you go, son, here's the strategy. And he'll go ahead and not do it for a couple times. And then like, oh man, dad was right. Same with our daughters too.
Yeah.
They usually catch on a little quicker than the boys.
Right. Well, and speaking of kids, just for the sake for the men who didn't catch your podcast about 5 years ago, bring us up to speed on your kids, their ages, and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. So I have 4 kids. All I ever wanted to do was be a father. From the time I was very, very young. So I have a 29-year-old today, as a matter of fact. It's her birthday. 25-year-old son. They're fully functional adults doing their thing. And then I have a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. And those two are a riot. You can hear us all walking down the block. Those 2 clowns are the funniest girls in the world. But
see, your oldest is 29.
Yeah. I started very young. I was like 19.
How old are you?
I'm 49, actually. I'm 48. I'm going to be 49 this month.
I was gonna say you look like such a young guy, like, you know, because you and I aren't that far off in age. I'm 46. My oldest is 15. So I'm sitting there thinking like, wow, 29. Like that's so you definitely have the stress. So obviously, been a father for almost 30 years. You've got the teenagers that are still in there, but you've ran the whole gamut. So, you know, now I know the audience is definitely hooked. They really want to know some of these mindset strategies that we're going to be talking about. First of all, before we identify self-sabotage, right? Let's identify what are some of the characteristics that you teach or that you've learned in the SEAL teams that have been most beneficial, most effective performing at a high level.
So on the surface, or here's how it started. So when you're training snipers, they're to hit targets at distance, to stalk targets who are experienced SEAL sniper instructors, right? To move unseen to the point where you can take a shot and drill them right between the eyes if you wanted, and we can't even see these guys. To do all of these things, it's a matter of crossing complexity, right? It's a very complex thing to do, but you need to break it down and master each skill set. And what I found, this is probably the genesis of all things I actually do, is what I found is where their performance breakdown was, they would just lock onto it and they just beat their heads against it and try to muscle through it. And that's what men do, right? Matter of fact, that's why a lot of guys go to try to elevate their performance and they just go up and go back down because they don't have a performance formula. But what I learned was, it was like, hey, the thing you're failing at is not the place to do the work. There's 20 other things, and there's probably 3-4 things that are impacting your ability to hit the target, right? And you're not addressing them. And the thing about long distance shooting, it's about 500 yards when I'm working with somebody and things start to feel like magic to them because they're like, what the heck's going on? I can't figure out why I'm all of a sudden missing. 500 yards is actually not that far, but unless you're a sniper instructor, it might be too far. But what it is like, just say there's 20 things that'll impact your bullet, right? That'll influence your bullet. And no one thing, right, is going to be big enough to move it off target. But usually it's a couple, 3-4 things that together will move it off target. So it was never this obvious thing to them. So they never knew where to go to fix it, right? Because they didn't have a process to break it all down to identify which things might be impacting the bullet. And now I found that across the board to be the fundamental truth of performance. One, it's a holistic kind of thing. And 2, wherever your breakdown is, it's probably not the place you need to be focusing. It's probably something else causing that miss.
What do you usually find that causes the miss?
Ooh. if so there's two ways we can think about the miss, right? We can think about like, okay, well, what are the strategies and tactics that we need to execute? So if those are off, we're going to miss, of course, but that's kind of obvious, right? We're smart guys. We can find our way to those things sometimes. I would say what often causes the big miss is something I call prioritizing by power. So what happens is guys get all fired up about something. I want to get some 6-pack abs, or I want to make more money, or I'm going to become a hunter. I'm going to learn how to beat I beat the heck out of someone on the street, whatever fires them up. And they go for that, but it's not in the context of the whole, right? There's about a dozen human elements, right, that make up a good life. And when they don't prioritize by power, they're expending all their energy, time, money, energy, creativity into this one thing. And it probably wasn't the thing to be paying attention to first. And then what happens is the reality of life and the situation, the things that they needed to address, the near targets, start to get them. And they basically dogpile on them. And then they don't have the time. They don't have the energy. They don't have the creativity to keep it up. That's why so many guys are EKG. They're continuously not prioritizing by power. So you'd call it worrying in order. Like they're just not sequencing things right. They're putting the roof before the foundation goes up.
So let's take a real world example, right? You mentioned a couple things in there, like, oh, I have health goals, or I have financial goals. Maybe it's marriage goals, right? Maybe it's even connecting with your kids type of goals. But when you say prioritization by power, do you have a story that you could share, or an example that really hits that home, is like on a deeper level?
Yeah. So let me do it like this. I do this on the webinar quite a bit. So let me kind of like go 30,000 foot view. So there's a formula I teach, and it's a formula for crossing complexity, or another way to say it is to be mastery. It's how to become a master at mastering things, or an expert at becoming an expert. It's really how to get really, really good at getting really, really good at stuff. And it goes identify, assess, prioritize by power, and execute. So I got to give you the whole formula to talk about the prioritize by power. So if you just look at life itself, we need to identify that which impacts our ability to live a good life. Now think about that. We're men, we're fathers. Our job is to live a good life so we can show our sons and daughters how to do so. Now, how could you live a good life if you don't identify the parts of it? It was the same thing inside a sniper cell. How could you hit a head-sized moving target at 800 yards if you don't identify all the parts that go into that bullet impacting the target? You can't, because you can't address, you know what I mean? You would never be able to hit it, right? That's an incredible shot. So first we need to identify, well, what are the parts of life? And when you do the work, it's about a dozen. They're the same for everybody. We're not all the unique snowflakes. As our friend Larry Yatch likes to say, we're not all unique snowflakes like people think so. We're all about the same thing. Now, but we have to assess these things. So again, think about it like the sniper shot. We're looking at all of the parts. Okay, let's make an assessment. Are they in good shape? I go red, green, blue, right? Are they broken? Like, are they okay? Are they doing really, really well? Whatever it is. And we assess their current and future trajectory, right? And think now you can apply that to life. Like, okay, fitness, finances, family, friends, flow states, tribes, things like that. It's like, okay, what do those things look like now? And should I continue in my same behavior? What will they look like in the future? So now you've got yourself a good picture. You got a picture of the thing. In this case, we're calling it life. But we'll be able to bring life all the way down to a fitness goal here in a minute. Now, here's the thing. Guess what happens? So I have people use a mind map. I have like a whole instructions for this. And I'm like, okay, identify that which impacts your ability to live a good life. And then now make an assessment of each. Now, guess what happens? Like people be like, oh my gosh, I use again, red, green, blue, red is broken. There's all kinds of red. When somebody, you know what I mean? It's like if you haven't taken your car in for 45 years old, you haven't gone to a checkup or taken your car in for 40 years, like probably going to have some things a little bit rusty and crusty, just not working so well anymore, right? So you're going to have some red. Now, here's the thing. Men let their psychology drive them. Whatever the latest marketing, whatever they saw on TV, and that's like, oh, okay, I got to go in and fix that thing. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. That's when we go to prioritizing by power. Now, here's what prioritizing by power means. What is the one thing that if you got handled would ripple across as many other things as possible? And here's the key, and produce an early return on your investment of time, money, energy, and creativity. And this is where men and women go wrong, but this is where men really go wrong. They move in a way where they sacrifice their purpose and their passion to get things done, rather than get things done in a way that allows them to identify their purpose and reveal their passion and produce the deployable levels of time, money, energy, creativity required to live it. So let me simplify that. Prioritizing by power means we're going to do something. We're going to invest time, money, energy, creativity, but we're going to do it in a way where we get more deployable levels of time, money, energy, and creativity back. Think about that. Otherwise, it's like eating snow to hydrate. And this is why on your podcast, sometimes your intros, right? We all hear podcasts and you hear somebody get introduced, like, how in God's name did this human being do all of these amazing, like, what? And how they do it is they move in a way where they're continuously producing more power, time, money, energy, and creativity. And then we execute and evolve. And the execution and evolution, right, is part of that process. It is what makes the prioritization by power, right? It's what makes that possible. It's what produces the return. Let me pause right there, man. I just riffed on that one, but we can go so many directions with that. You want me to go into fitness? Like, how do we want to do it? Or the common thing I hear from guys?
Yeah, let's hear. So what's the common thing you hear from guys?
Yeah, like, my family's my number one priority. Okay. They're the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, no. So the moment you hold one thing as the most important thing in all circumstances is when that thing becomes a demon. Right? C.S. Lewis speaks to this a whole bunch in a book called Mere Christianity. Like, he'll describe some of this probably better than I will. But here's the deal. Have you ever seen those trucks, like a dumpster truck, the ones that do the trash, and they got like 4 or 6 tires that are on the ground. They got those 2 tires in back, but they're not even touching the ground. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about? It's like an elevated thing. It's because when they go up an elevation, those tires connect. And what happens is, if you take that kind of picture and say, well, those 2 tires they're not important. It's the other tires that are they're the important things. It's like, well, they're going to be important during certain times and certain moments. So like on my webinar, I do an example, like, and I'm not saying anything bad about guys who just refuse to do anything but be home from dinner every single night. I understand sometimes that can be appropriate, but sometimes it might make more sense for a guy to redeploy that time and energy into doing something that will improve his ability to perform in the marketplace, because we do live in the most competitive, dynamic, technologically driven marketplace that this planet has ever seen. And guys are spending way too much time and energy just to earn a living, and that's what's killing them. So sometimes you need to study, and you need to use some of that time so that you can deploy it into maybe something like a career, right? Because there's still people working 8 hours a day. It's like they think they're in a factory, something like that. Like, can you really work 8 hours a day and still care for your family, still care for your fitness, still care for your friends? Not usually, not in this kind of world. So prioritizing by power might give that gentleman the permission he needed to become amazing at what he does. And that will be a pool of resources from family, time, money, energy, and creativity. But if he invests it correctly, he's going to end up with more time, money, energy, and creativity for the long run.
The thing that's coming up for me right now is how extreme we are as men, right? We're full throttle or no throttle. We're not going to go to the gym unless we can spend 90 minutes there. We're not going to pull the car out of the garage unless we can go, 100 miles an hour, right?
Yep.
I mean, we're very extreme when it comes to those types of mindsets. So like, for instance, if like, hey, I am at home for dinner every night with my family, no exceptions, full throttle, no throttle. That's just the way I am, right? And there's no deviation in that whatsoever. If I'm going to go achieve a fitness goal, I'm going to go full throttle on that. And here, and same thing with finances, same thing with creating a business. I mean, you name it, right? What I see and find is that the minute, number one, that type of mindset of like, well, hey, what if I sprinkle in one night away from the family, away from dinner, to go invest in myself, whether that's to learn a new skill set, to do something that's going to improve our overall, family connection. I'll have more time. I'll be able to do something right. It's going to have an ROI attached to it. At the same time, men are notorious about thinking, well, I just can't do that because it doesn't fit into my extreme thinking already that I have to do this other thing. Right. the other thing as well is as soon as there is a small hiccup in any situation like that, like, so for, I'm thinking of like fitness, right? Like a guy's like, I'm going to work out every day, and they do that for 2 weeks. And the one day that they miss, the baby goes out with the bathwater and they scrape the whole thing. It's like, oh, well, forget it now. I didn't do it. Like one other example that I can think of right now, I'm personally leading 26 men in our mastermind through a 90-day alcohol-free challenge. And it's meant, right? If you really look at the challenge right now, I haven't deviated from it. I think we're on day 30 right now as we record this podcast. I haven't deviated from it. I won't, because I've committed to it. We've had a couple guys in there of like, oh, I drank, so I might as well just bow out of this thing, and I caution men with that kind of thinking. I'm like, be careful about that. You slipped up once, but let's finish the 90-day window here, right? Get back on the horse and get back to it. You don't have to exit the entire 90-day commitment because you slipped up. In fact, if that's the way you're going about your life in its entirety, it's super dangerous. Now I get the we need to be committed to what we're doing. But also, if there's something that might detour us a little bit, men are just like, oh, forget it. Forget the whole thing. Why do we do that?
Well, oh boy, there's so much stuff. So if I go, remind me of the guys quitting the 90-day thing, just in case I miss it as I'm going down. So first, let's talk about the full throttle thing.
Yeah.
So one, you got to recognize, fellas, that's probably coming from marketing. Like, you know what I mean? So marketing, the purpose of marketing is to produce the space of possibilities for sales to happen. And the most effective piece of marketing is have you be unsatisfied. So it's to put you in an unsatisfactory situation. That is why we're so good at consuming things and watching a whole bunch of people do a whole bunch of things that we can't or probably shouldn't be doing. So we're comparing when we go to do fitness, we're looking at models and athletes. But that's not what we are unless we are, right? Like, okay, when I go do my fitness, like, well, what I am is a breadwinner. What I am is a man who identifies that which impacts my ability to live a good life. I earn a living, and that's what I do. Now, fitness is definitely part of that. Now, another piece, though, for full throttle is like, well, what are you going full throttle on? Now, what if what you did is created an ambition? Again, what does a good life look like? How much money do I need to earn today? And for when the time comes when I can no longer work? And what are the conventional and unconventional strategies that I need to execute to get this all done and show my sons and daughters how to do it or lead others to do the same? Now, if you're going to go full throttle, that's what I'd go full throttle in. What you say is a good life, not what got pumped into you from the Red Bull commercials and the YouTube and everything like that. Make sense? Like how I'm saying that? Okay.
Totally.
Now, I want to speak to that hiccup and the drinking thing. Oh, what was I going to say on that one? So why do they quit? I think I lost where I was going with that one. Dang it. I should have wrote that one down. I had something there for you when you said it, but I wanted to go back up to the throttle. If it comes back to me, I'll pull it up.
Okay.
It'll pop in my brain, or it won't.
Yeah.
I had something really, really good. All right, everybody stay tuned because it's coming.
Yeah. No, yeah, we'll get back. So let's get back to your point about like, hey, I'm going to invest in myself. Like maybe it's one night a week that I'm not having dinner with my family, that I might go get this, a different or better ROI that's going to put us in a better situation down the road. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we really finished up with that particular thought.
Yeah. So say that again. Ask me that specifically. Like, what do you?
So I think what happened was when we started talking about that, right? We started talking about how we as men, we can give ourselves permission to do something like that, right? To invest in ourselves, time, energy, resources, all that to get a specific ROI that might improve the overall state of our lives, right? And the thing that I flipped a switch on you there because I said, a lot of us, what we do is we're these extreme thinkers. Like, for instance, a lot of men that I think and I know, we're like, well, I can't do that. That's one night away from my family. And that kind of goes to that full throttle or no throttle thinking. Well, I have to have dinner with my family every night of the week or not at all, right? There is no wiggle room in there. So I was really trying, and you nailed it beautifully. What I was really trying to understand is, why do we have that mentality to where it has to, like, for some reason, it has to be that way for us?
Oh, I got you. Because we're not operating strategically speaking. We are drifting. So a lot of the things we believe and do are things we made up as kids or just while going through life. And we've settled into those things. And that's why when someone's like, oh, I just want to be free, you know what I mean? Like, I just want all the time and money in the world to be free. It's like, you probably wouldn't be free still, right? Again, because of marketing, marketplace noise, all the conversations around us. So that's just kind of a sheep thing to do, because we didn't just choose that thing strategically speaking. We didn't choose it within the context. Like, again, if you don't know what the dozen or so parts of life that impact your ability to live a good life, then for sure, all of your habits, right? All of your practices are outside of strategy. They cannot be strategic because you don't have intentions, right? You don't have intentions to fulfill. So they're just so used to staying in their psychological comfort zone. And a lot of times, like, here's the problem, like with personal development or anything like that. So when I'm talking to guys, I'm like, hey, if I could just magic wand and just make you 10 times the man you are right now, would you want it? And the guys would initially say yes. But when I'm interviewing them for some of my programs, I ask that question near the end, and they're like, oh, no. Because if I had you perform at 10x, like, that's all the bad things too, right? I don't want to inflate anything, because if the bad's coming with the good, that's going to be a problem. And again, because they're just not cleaned up. Like, they don't know what they're after.
So it sounds like we really must be 100% clear on the direction we're going. This reminds me of the quote that a lot of us have heard, which is, be careful about the ladder that you climb and what you pursue, because you could get to the top and realize, wow, climb the wrong one, as we look out at the horizon. So what I think I'm hearing is be very, very clear on the ladder that you're climbing. Be very, very clear on what it is that what you guys, what I always hear you and Larry Yatch used to talk about, which is desired end state. Is that correct?
Yeah. Desired end state or ambition or anything. But I mean, not only just clarity, be accurate. If you're, you know what I mean? If we're going to build a car, like, not only need to be clear on all of the parts, but we need to make sure we have all the right parts as well. Right. So again, if we're coming back to our role as a man, which is to live a good life so we can lead others to do the same, I believe, then we need to really understand what the parts of life are. And then once we got them, we hold on to it. And then you can go our extreme nature is a blessing, right? If it's strategic, if it is meaningful, and meaningful to me means it'll actually impact your ability to live a good life. But 2 hours at the gym or whatever fitness goal you got, the reason they're going to quit is they're like, at some point, they're like, it's not really going to impact my life. And like, you're right. Cardiovascular, you know what I mean? You don't need 6-pack abs if you're broke. You need millions and millions of dollars nowadays. There's no more pensions. There's no lifelong healthcare. Like, you got to be a fierce competitor in this marketplace, right? So intuitively, their autopoiesis, which means we self-select survival. So intuitively, there's subconscious psychology, something in them saying, hey, this actually isn't that important. And that's why, again, guys start things and stop things all the time. Right? Even the drinking thing, that might have been, that could be the case. Like, hey, watch your commitments, fellas. Like, I've thought, think about things like that. I'm like, ooh, what I got going on this month. So for me, I'm like, oh, that might not be a good time for me to take on something that could be requiring some discipline and mental toughness, because that's like a muscle. That's another thing too. Men are way over indexed on mental discipline or discipline and mental toughness. Like, we can go to that one too. That's been so blown up with marketing. That's just killing guys.
Yeah.
Anyway, so sometimes their commitments just aren't strategic, and whether they know it or not, the reality of their situation is going to bat them back down.
I definitely want to get to the mental toughness piece, but I want to talk about getting clear on what it is that we truly want, because you're right. I mean, some of us are chasing things we have men listening to this podcast right now. And I know I've been there in the past myself. Even if I sat down and analyzed my life right now, I bet I could identify maybe something that I'm doing isn't to the desired end state of where it is that I want to go, without a doubt. Right. Yeah. So let's take some of these things, right, that are really, really important in a man's life. Let's take marriage, and let's take parenting, and let's take optimizing our own physical, mental, emotional selves, right? So those three areas. How do we know if we're clear on goals in those areas?
So what we did is we just identified parts of what a good life would look like.
Sure.
And then we need to assess the state of those. And how I do it is, if I were to, on this, if you can everyone visualize a mind map, there's a part, right? Which was, what was one of them? Parenting, right?
Right.
You'd click on the thing and it would open up, and then you'd see something that goes impacts, parts, and practices. So then, like let me use, you're talking about optimizing ourselves. That's something I call performance health, right? So performance health could be a part of life, like, okay, my body, like my energy. And I would open that up and it'd go impacts, parts, and practices. Under the impacts, there might be discipline. I'm not saying discipline is not useful. I'm just saying it's blown up, right? We'll talk about that later. There could be creativity, right? There could be energy. Like, these are the impacts of what I call performance health. And there's positive impacts and negative impacts. And if you're experiencing the negative, right? If you're like, oh, I'm not creative, I don't have discipline, right? I don't have the energy. I'm like one of those sorry asses at 3:30 in the afternoon that just, I'm out and I got to drink my beer just to energize for, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Then you'd be like, okay, my performance health, that is not going to allow me to care for my life. That is not satisfactory. That thing is in the red. And they'd be like, well, what are the parts of performance health? Diet, hydration, exercise, mindfulness. Like, those would be the parts, right? And like, okay, I got that. Am I missing any parts? Like, nope, I have all of those things. I'm consuming at least those things, maybe not enough, but those parts are present, right? And then now, what are the practices I need to be in? Now, what's interesting, if you go prioritize by power, the practices look like, exercising, working out, stuff like that. But you tune them towards the impacts, right? So when you take something like that, you're like, okay, well, what do I need to do to care for the energy, care for the creativity? And then you design your practices around that. Let me pause right there. I just went down a little rabbit hole. Pull me back up.
No, that was good. Keep going. Yeah.
Okay. So that would be a thing, right? So now you've got performance health, now so you did the same. What else did you say were the categories? Performance health, family.
Marriage and parenting.
Okay. Parenting, marriage. Now if you're looking at parenting, marriage, you're like, man, I'm sucking on all of these things. Like, you don't even need to do the whole drill, impacts, parts, and practices. You can just look at it and be like, right? Like, I'm not satisfied. And that's an okay place to start. Again, you got to recognize it's your psychology, and the standards are being set by marketing and YouTube and Facebook and stuff like that. But it's okay to start there, because when you go through this drill, you're going to define this thing for yourself, but you got to dive in first. Now, just in the context of everything, that would be a great example right there. Because think about parenting and marriage. Like, well, if you're showing up tired, lack of discipline, short-tempered, are those things going to go well, parenting or marriage?
No.
So that would be another case right there. You'd be like, you know what? I probably need to get this performance health thing handled. I got to make sure I'm getting enough sleep, drinking my gallon of water, getting enough cardio and physical fitness and flexibility inside, and some mindfulness, so that I can be fully present with my family. And I'm sure everybody in your family would be fine if you didn't sit down at the dinner table, guzzle your beer, you know what I mean, and not pay attention to anyone. I'm sure they'd all be fine with it if you just went and like dropped the Cliff Bar, went for a run, and then came back and was fully present with them after.
Yeah.
Could be something like that, but something besides just whatever your psychology landed on.
Yeah.
There's a good rule.
You just hit a couple of things there that I think it's hard for men to digest just in general. When men get married, start having kids, working full time, the first thing we throw out the window is our self-care. Oh, no, can't take care of me. You got to take care of everybody else. And what I think we really do is that's a huge disservice to not only us, but the people in our lives. Because if our mental, emotional, and physical state is optimized, and when I say physical, I'm in agreement with you. You don't have to have a six-pack to have physical optimization, right? It's are you moving your body? Are you well hydrated? Are you getting enough sleep? Those types of things, right? Mentally and emotionally, you've got to be in optimal shape mentally and emotionally, because this is where, if those things go unchecked, you're going to have less patience, less resilience, less mental toughness that you mentioned before. The other thing too, that really emerged for me when you were talking was if we, so we talked a lot about self-care, but if you're looking at marriage, and so like if I were to look at my marriage or men in general looking at their marriage, be like, all right, what is it that has my attention within the marriage that maybe doesn't feel as on point? And what I can tell you, what I hear most of the time with men is it's communication. And normally what I hear, and I'm sure you hear this too, when I ask men, well, what does good communication look like? I usually hear, Eric, I hear two words all the time: more and better. I want more communication. I want better communication. I'm like, that does not tell you anything. What is more and better? What is that? Like, what's happening? What things are happening? Most importantly, what skills need to be learned in order to have better communication, not just better. So I use this example quite a bit that I think you'll appreciate. When men say, I want more or better communication, that's a lot like going to your doctor. He looks at your blood work and he's like, all right, Eric, I need you to get in better health. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Do I have diabetes? Do I have high cholesterol? Am I overweight? Like, what? Nope. Just get in better health. Mm-hmm. Do more things to be healthier. And you're like, well, what more things do I need to do to get in? And what does better health even look like? So it's so general and it doesn't give us any specifics, right? So I think one of the things you're talking about too is you've got to be very specific with what it is that you are going to prioritize, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, you're right, because if communication was going to become a priority, right? If you're drilling down on this kind of visual map we're putting together, well, you need, what are the impacts, positive and negative? And then are those satisfactory, unsatisfactory? If it's, and those are the things, that's the more, like more and better, like, well, what are the impacts? Like not what is the thing, you know what I mean? Because yeah, the parts and practices, that's kind of the easy part. But it's like, okay, well, how is this impacting my life? Because if you don't do that, you won't know if it's a life or death situation, right? But if you're like, oh yeah, these impacts and they should continue, it's game over, right? And then a quick Google search, then you can look up communication and then be in a set of practices. But now, once you're in a set of practices, that means it's got to make its way onto our calendar. And if it wasn't prioritized by power, it's going to compete against other things that might be more of a priority in the moment. See, it's always terrain and situation dictates, right? My sniper weapon and my gun is very high priority in the middle of a mission. Very, very, don't even know where it is when I'm home on liberty. You know what I mean? It's like always terrain and situation. So otherwise, they're just going to start something again and then lose the respect from their spouse, right? And then the identities go down, then the communication even gets worse because they're not even listening to you anymore. Can you keep starting things and not finishing them?
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. One of the things that, so you talk about distraction over discipline, right? It seems very, very important in the moment. These are super minor examples, but in our mastermind, right, we have 30 call teams that we do per week that are offered on our calendar that men can take advantage of. And I always warn men, I'm always like, when 5 p.m. or whatever your call team time is, there's going to be about 4 or 5 things that will want to grab your attention. It'll be your emails. It might be your kids. It might be work. It might be something, right? But sometimes that discipline is a lot like church on Sunday for some people, right? They're like, oh, it's been an okay week and there's really nothing on fire and I'm good with God, and it'd just be easier to either sleep in or just sit here and have my coffee with my wife, or like fitness, right? It's like, I worked out a couple of days ago and I don't really need to work out today. There's other things that I need to do, but it's like having that discipline to do that. I think what you call, is it the impact? Is that right? Or is it what was the term you used?
Yeah. Impacts, positive and negative.
Yeah.
Intentions.
Okay. The intentions. And sometimes, man, our discipline just goes out the window when we're distracted in that moment. And it's actually a really good segue to the final thing I really wanted to talk to you about, which was sustainability. You mentioned like, oh, you just keep starting things and then you just give up, right? I don't know if is that just a genuine human nature thing? Like, are humans we're just sort of programmed to do that when maybe things get too tough or we just get too busy or too overwhelmed? We're like, whatever. I know you guys obviously in the teams, I don't know if that is completely and totally like trained out of you, because you guys are so focused and so disciplined is there just something, what is it that the regular people out in the world who aren't a SEAL, what are the things that we can do to be like, hey, I promised myself I'm going to do this, to have this discipline, and I'm going to see it out. I'm going to see it through. What are the missing things?
So all my SEAL brothers and everything like that with the discipline and mental toughness, it's great. I'm just going to give you a different perspective. So I believe there's an over indexing in discipline and mental toughness because it's a very masculine way to approach things. And here's how the analogy I would give you. If everybody was watching, if they're on audio, you can just imagine yourself standing up with a rifle in your hand and you have a target. Now, if I held this rifle in my hand and I hit my target and I'm holding it up, what would happen? I mean, I'd be hitting the bullseye because I'm good, but what would eventually happen?
I guess you'd get tired holding it like that. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. I don't know if that's right or wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my muscle would start to fatigue. I'd start to shake. I'd start missing the bullseye, and eventually I'd come off target. So I think about discipline when I'm using muscle to do something. Make sense?
Yeah, totally.
I think of discipline like a muscle. If you guys don't believe me, don't sleep tonight and see how you eat tomorrow, see how your workout goes, see how all of those things go. Now, discipline, so there's a little formula I have. Personality, time, strength, desire. So we're going to do something, right? Like, well, first and foremost, is that authentically you? Like, oh, I'm going to go do CrossFit or anything. And CrossFit's amazing. Like, there's all this amazing stuff, but are you really that guy? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Are you going to get forearm tattoos and do, you know what I'm saying? Is that who you are? Because you might be a pickleball player. You might be a pickleball player.
Right.
Right. If you ever hear culture kills strategy, that your internal culture could be like, dude, I don't like the freaking music. Everybody's yelling. You know what I mean? Like, I just need to play some pickleball or whatever it is for you. So personality comes first when you're looking at this stuff. Be authentically you, right? Now, time. This is real. Like, do I have the time to do this thing? See, guys are like, and here's the problem. They think they're not disciplined. They think they don't have the mental toughness, and they might not. I'm not saying that's not true, but it's like, I was trying to do something that wasn't even me. I was trying to take a French poodle and have it do a Belgian Malinois workout. You know what I mean? Like, that ain't going to work. And like, well, do you have the time to do that? Like, oh yeah, I'm hitting the gym. Like, well, you might not have the time to hit the gym. You might have 15, 20 minutes. You might have to hit the Peloton bike. I don't know. Burpees. Do something, you know what I mean? Could be something totally different. Now, personality, time. Now comes strength. Like, okay, that's for me. I got the time to do it. I'm not in the habit, or I'm so comfortable in this thing. I need the discipline to pull off of something, or I need the discipline to start something. But that's all discipline it is. Discipline is what gets the plane in the air, right? So it's prioritizing by power. You know what I mean? Again, we can't just have this one thing rule all things all the time. So it gets you in the air, but what needs to come right behind that is desire. So when people want to like, hey, Eric, Navy SEAL, like, you look pretty fit. Teach me how to get, you know, like, okay. And I go work out. I go, okay, what's the number one rule? Work hard, sweat, grunt, whatever, you know, whatever it is, put my hat down low, not make eye contact and mad dog everybody in the gym, whatever, you know, whatever their drill is. I'm like, no, man, number one rule is you want to come back tomorrow. See, old school dog training used to be force the dog to do what you want to do. And what happens when the force is removed? Dog goes right back. Same thing with parenting. You force your kids to do a whole bunch of stuff. As soon as you're out of the picture, which if you keep forcing them, by the way, you will be the moment they turn 18, or at least can financially support themselves, right? They're just going to fall back to what they were doing. The way, it's not, I don't want to say new school, the way you actually train a dog is you change what they desire to do. And then you don't have to do anything. So if you're looking at a workout program, anything like that, is like, hey, don't get all spun up on this, again, this one size fits all definition of masculinity. Be like, okay, does it fit my personality? Am I a pickleball player? Am I a CrossFit guy? Do I actually have the time? That's the mechanism of reality. A lot of guys start and stop stuff because they're outside the mechanisms of reality. They're trying to do 5 hours worth of stuff in a 4-hour time block. It just ain't going to work. Like, okay, now I can use some of my discipline, but man, if I didn't sleep, if my diet's all jacked up, if I've been, you know what I mean, forcing myself to do all kinds of things I don't want to do all day long. You know what I mean? I'm like, I don't want to force myself to now go to the gym. You know what I mean? I need to use it just a little bit, but then I got to make it really enjoyable. That could be music, that could be the environment, like anything like that. So personality, time, strength, and desire.
That's so cool, man. I want to challenge you a bit on the time thing, just because not that I'm challenging your particular formula, but I guess it's maybe just the thing that I'm sure you hear this all the time. It's like, I don't have time to do this. And you're like, here's a perfect example. You know, when it comes to me coaching some of our guys, right? Oh, I don't have time to connect with my wife. I don't have time for date nights. And I'm like, dude, this is like 2 hours of your time per week, which is about 1% of your total time per week. Take your wife out on a date, right? Mm-hmm. Or my kids, right? I just had this, my 13-year-old literally just walked past my office. Never has had an issue with grades whatsoever. None. And he just got first quarter grades and there were 5 missing assignments. And I'm like, what's the story here, man? I haven't had time. I was like, really? Because I've seen you, on your phone. I've seen you talking to your girlfriend. I've seen you I've seen you hang out with your friends.
Yeah.
I see that there's quite a bit of time. I don't see the prioritization or the discipline piece. So my last question is, this whole thing of time, is that giving people like an easy way out to be like, oh, I really just don't have the time? Or how do we need to view time? Like what, I think my questions are all over the place, but I think you understand where I'm coming from, right?
No, I totally get where you're coming from. So now we just got to draw the line here. So there's a difference between, there is 24 hours in a day, or there are 24 hours in a day. And then humans make up things. We live in story.
Yeah.
So like you said, you're like, oh, you're saying you don't have time. But if I were to put the video camera on you, what is so? What is true is you were on the phone. I videoed, you were on the phone 2 hours with your girlfriend. Oh, 45 minutes of a video game. Oh, probably backwards, but you know what I mean? That's what's so, right? So it's not, yeah, it's a slippery slope, but like time, but there's reality inside of that for sure. And how I like to do it, there's a difference between a reason and an excuse. So if you remove an excuse, the condition remains. Homework still ain't getting done. But if you're like, okay, you're right, let's get you canceled out of soccer or jiu-jitsu or anything like that, and then the homework starts getting like, oh, there was a reason. You really did have too many things going on. But I am with you. But that's a story. That's the thing, though. See, we can't let their stories mess our formula up. You know what I mean? It's like, no, you can't pretend you don't have time.
Right.
And then again, I'm so pragmatic. That's what with the life, I have this, I call it the life mission map. It goes on a roles and responsibility tracker, has standard operating practices, and it ends up on what I call dominant or ultimate calendar, right? So the time issue is already handled because like we engineered this thing. Unless they really, like some guys are still working, some guys are working 10, 12 hours a day, forget 8. Some guys are just getting nutty.
Well, the other thing too is kind of crazy. I put a post in our Dad Edge group. We've got thousands of guys in that group. And the post was simply this: how many hours a day are you working and how happy are you? Mm-hmm. And some of these guys were posting 12, 15, 16-hour days and posting they're miserable, but also, and then they were sprinkled in basically I would say the average hours of time working per day were 10 hours, but there was this element of nobility behind it and misery. Like, mm-hmm. I feel very noble working this hard, but I'm miserable, but it's noble. Like that one blows my mind a little bit.
Yeah. That's how the old factories got you, man. They make you think there's something good about it. It's but really it's slavery. You're just slaves. They're slaves to it. And they're not, it's just the world changed. So, when computers and the internet came out, they called that the third industrial revolution. We've been in the fourth for about, 30, 40 years. And the way you earn a living, the way you work is not through hard work. It's not like that. We're not punching rivets through things on an assembly line anymore. It's about creativity and value. Like nobody cares how hard you worked. It's how much value did you produce. Right. And once you start understanding value, importance, utility, and worth, then you can make that pivot. But you're right. They're holding on to that. It's just trying to fill this hole.
Right.
That'll never be filled because that's not what they're built for. They're living an inauthentic life.
Right.
And that's what they're going to teach. This is what I like to do to guys. When I'm doing the interview, I'm like, hey, are you joyful? Are you happy? Anything like that. Like, no, I don't like my work. I don't have any joy. I don't have any fun or anything like that. I'm like, okay, great. Let's fast forward. Like you have a 13-year-old son, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, all right, if you said those things, like, okay, hey, Larry, when your 13-year-old son is 30 years old and he comes to you and says, yeah, I hate what I do, and I just work my butt off that, I'm not having any fun. What would that feel like for you? This is what all dads can do. Like, what would it feel like when your son comes to you and tells you that? Because that's what he's going to do. If that's what you're doing, that's what he's going to do. Or he's going to watch you do it and lose respect for you. Might still love you, lose respect for you, and then he won't be coming to you at all. But at least he'll be living a good life.
Yeah.
He ain't going to be coming to you for answers, right?
That actually hurts my heart just thinking about that, because the real world here, right? My boys and I, my two older ones, my 13 and 15-year-old, we actually talk about this thing a lot. I really am trying to share with them story and examples around bringing value to somebody else, right? Owning a business, doing the work that makes you come alive. We say that a lot in this house. Do the work that makes you come alive, bring value to somebody else. Mm-hmm. If you can do those things, do the work that makes you come alive, do something that brings value to somebody else, that is just a match made in heaven, right? And you don't need, especially like you said, in the world we live in right now with all the technology, you truly don't need to do that anymore, and you can't. Never a time in human history has it been where we have this advantage where we can do this. I mean, my son, my 13-year-old wrote a book 2 years ago. It's called Never Give Up No Matter What. And it literally came out of, he was about ready to quit football when he was 8 years old because he wasn't being played, working his tail off, not being played. And I've only done this one time. And as it came out of my mouth, when I asked him the question, I was like, oh my God, I wish I wouldn't have asked him that. And that was, do you want to give up or do you want to finish what you started? And that was about a month left of the team. I was like, I just asked an 8-year-old if he wants to be out and gave him the green light to basically quit. And it's okay. And I was shocked. He was like, I'm going to finish what I started. I was like, holy shit. Okay, cool. And then out of that, it was tremendous lessons. And then 2 years later, when he was 10, that's when the idea of the book came about. And he was talking about his story. I was like, Mason, do you understand like how you could probably impact some other kid who felt just like you? I was like, just by writing a children's book, just by you sharing this story about how frustrated you were, how hard you were working, all these things, you could literally change the game for a kid who listens to your story. And he's like, well, what do I do? I was like, well, what if you wrote a book? And he's like, yeah, I can do. And he did. And I got to tell you, man, like that was such a cool example for him to experience of like, I can do something that makes me come alive. I can just share my story and it's going to bring value to somebody else. And it's going to give me some revenue, which is great. Right. But that wasn't the goal necessarily, but like just impacting somebody else. Man, this has been so cool. I know you've got a lot of things going on, a lot of things you offer. I would love for you to share where men can find you and everything that you're doing.
Yeah. The best place, Eric, on my website, ericdavis215.com.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even explore it. Really, I just changed the homepage. There's a webinar I do. It's free. I take people through that formula I was just describing. I talk about the importance of tribe building as well, and mastery and all of those things. So that's the best place, because that's at the end of the day, that's what I'm all about. It's not for the sake of this formula, but it's teaching men how to master things so that, by the way, because we are compensated in direct proportion we are to other human beings. So guess what? When you get really, really good at life and mastering it, your ability to produce income, to earn a living increases, right? Because what other people need to know to make their life better. So it's a great way to start.
You're doing good work in the world, man. Thank you for all you're doing. And thank you for your service.
Oh, my pleasure. And as are you, man. It's such a pleasure to be on with guys like you. So it's like, this is the deal right here.
Back at you, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Anytime.